So last night we had another roughing the passer penalty called in the game.
Was that the worst one yet?
That's the worst one I've seen.
I don't know, dude. The
just
one
say don't touch him.
The one Chris Jones on Derek Carr was pretty bad.
That one was really bad. That was bad.
But Nick Bosa got popped for one, and it was an interception that was returned.
For
it was a pick six, and then it got nullified because there was a roughing the passer on Nick Bosa. And so, of course, everybody was pretty pissy about it afterwards. And then Nick Bosa just kind of, hey, little Matthew McConaughey type vibe from Nick Bosa, and he talked about it following the game.
I landed on him. I just kind of, I don't know, I thought he still had the ball. I was kind of thinking about while I was going to the ground whether he had the ball or not, and I forgot to roll off. I'm usually better at doing that, so it was a good call, I guess.
First off, he was kind of around people. Like, that's the one thing I don't understand about the rule from the NFL standpoint is, what do you want these players to do? Like, he hit him and he's like around the pocket. Like, there's other bodies and legs and people that he's either hitting into and getting hurt. He's hitting into them. They're getting hurt. Like, I don't know how you prevent what has always been a typical play when the quarterback's in the pocket and gets sacked or gets hit. Like, you can't prevent some certain things from happening. If the quarterback gets hurt, he gets hurt. Like, I'm a quarterback, and I'm saying this. I think it's an unfair rule in the league. And I think it obviously in that game, too, completely – I mean, not changed it to make it where, like, this, Seattle looked like they had a shot. But, I mean, that game's over at that point.
Yeah.
So I hate seeing it, honestly. I think it's awful for the game.
He's such a dope athlete. He got to him again and found a way to be going to the ground with Geno and not putting his weight on top of the quarterback once they hit the ground. The biggest issue I have here is that you're putting these defensive players in a position where they're in harm's way now. And the reason why they're in harm's way is because they're ultimately, the less you have to think about, the better you are at reacting. And when you react, that's, you're lessening the chances of you getting hurt. If I'm thinking about, okay, how am I going to hit him? How am I going to land? What do I do if he lets the ball go? What do I do if he still has it? Like there are so many. How high am I? Am I too low to try to get him down? Like it's like, am I too high to try to get him down? It really is compromising these guys in those moments. Like if they're in the open field, if they're in the sack zone, wherever it may be, the way these rules are playing out with the contact situation is it's really, really compromising defenders. I really believe that, and that puts them in danger, and I don't know that that's right.
Troy Vincent, he's the EVP of football ops, your buddy there, LaVar.
Yeah.
He said they're going to discuss the possibility of making these reviewable in the offseason. Yeah, I'll believe it when I see it. And I'll believe that it'll go longer than a year when I see that, too, because we went down this road with pass interference after the NFC Championship game between the Rams and Saints, and it was a sham. Like it was a waste of time by the time the season was coming to an end. I don't know on these quote-unquote judgment calls, like I don't know what the solution is other than we're at this point. And, by the way, the counter to this is going to be, well, roughing the passer calls are down significantly from last year. But the point is, in these big spots when everybody's talking about it, and this is multiple times now that we can just think off the top of our head of roughing the passer calls that we've seen in big primetime games, it's going to cost somebody a playoff game like it did, and that's when I think there's going to be some change. I'm just skeptical that they're going to do anything this offseason. I just don't see it happening. But this is the NFL, so congratulations, what everybody wanted. And now we get to have more fun with the NFL and these questionable calls.
Let me ask you guys this. So this rule's put into place to protect who? Quarterbacks, right? Because they're the face of the franchise. They're the face of the league. All right, what's one of the best stories that we literally let off the show talking about?
Brock Purdy.
There you go. Like there's examples of that. Like the Jets brought in Mike White, and now he's been helping to uplift their offense and give them a shot at still making the playoffs. Like you go through the league, and at some point you have to realize like it's football, man. I don't care if it's a non-contact injury or an injury that occurs due to contact. Guys are going to get hurt. Quarterbacks are going to get hurt. And I know you're trying to limit that as much as possible, but you can't protect them for everything. And you have to, at some point, too, lean into some of these other stories and some of these good stories that are out there. And it's what makes football teams and games interesting. And I think there's a need for depth there, too, at the quarterback position. So I think it's so short-sighted of the NFL to implement a rule like this, whereas LaVar put it, like you're protecting a quarterback, but you're actually putting defensive players now at risk. And on top of that, like we have some of the best stories right now in the NFL are backups playing, Brock Purdy playing, Mike White playing. Some of these things that have occurred in some cases due to injury, in other cases just due to poor play. But either way, you get to see new faces at that position. It's tough. It's a tough pill to swallow to watch, I think, if you're a fan and you see a pick six or a big play like that, and then you see it wiped away for what? Like most people who are watching football nowadays, they don't look at that and think roughing the passer. And I think the NFL really needs to take a good, hard look at the language or how the play actually occurs to determine if it's really worth the penalty and how it's impacting games right now, especially as we get more involved with gambling and gaming, because that's the other thing. It's like how that ends up impacting the game based on spreads, totals, over-unders, and all that.
By the way, do you think it's better that it's reviewable by somebody upstairs or that a coach can challenge it? Like if you were to fix roughing the passer, and if this is really a point of emphasis, like Troy Vincent said it's going to be,
even if the coach can challenge it, it's still being reviewed by someone upstairs.
Exactly.
And by the way, the process for the NFL is not someone upstairs; it's New York. It goes back to the folks in New York. So that's who you're ultimately giving the power to. And I think there's always been a thought, and again, I don't mean to pick out college football as the beacon of hope or light of how replay should be conducted, but you have replay officials there on site, and those replay officials there on site are the ones actually handling it in college football. It's a efficient process. They do a good job, in particular, for the most part, ruling on targeting plays of that nature and what's within the rule book. And the NFL can do the same thing. But I think, that the NFL office wants to have a stranglehold on everything they do and to find consistency. Yet I think that's one of the biggest issues is their officials lack consistency game by game. And even how maybe not the roughing the passer call, but a lot of the calls that have been made, they lack the consistency that you see in others. So I think you could clean this up a lot, but I don't know that the NFL is willing to do that. I think it's one of the reasons why you've seen so many people leave the NFL office who've been on the officiating side or the Rules and Competition Committee, and you look at the guys like Dean Blandino, Mike Pereira, and I'm not speaking for them, but they leave to go to these other jobs, and they're just like, yeah, it's probably a better gig than dealing with the NFL that just doesn't seem to want to get this thing right.
Yeah, where you're basically having to play by what the NFL rulebook is, and it's still pissing everybody off. Like, imagine being an official. At best, 50% of the crowd likes you at best by the time the game's over, and yet now it's being played out on national television, and when the officials get called for it and these people get outraged, they're the ones that get buried for it. And I also like how people afterwards say, well, shouldn't they have to, answer questions? Shouldn't they be held accountable for this stuff? Like, aren't they making calls based on the rule book they're handed by the league? And if there's a point of emphasis on a call that they want to look at during a course of a season, like, isn't that's told to them? Like, remember, was it holding? Was it a couple of years ago? It was like holding or illegal hands to the face or something like that was a point of emphasis. And then you saw the numbers jump up and all that. Like, it feels like they're just simply doing what they're being instructed by the league, and sort of just, it's kind of a kill the messenger spot for these officials, and thus everybody gets pissed off, and maybe they're yelling at the wrong people. I don't know. I don't see how this is going to get solved, but maybe LaVar can get Troy Vincent on the phone. We can hammer this out together.